What is it that makes a man great? Or better yet, what is it that makes any leader great? These and a number of questions come to mind when I think of the third presidency of this great country of ours. My name is Paul Martin Konyango, and you and I this day are going to take a gentle glance across the history of the late President Mwai Kibaki's regime. Mwai Kibaki was a very notable figure. There is a lot of things that one would mention as concerns his legacy, perhaps even the 10 years that he spent as vice president of this country, or perhaps even since 1969 to 1991, the years with which he was in the cabinet of our country, holding various ministerial positions. This alone, by a huge measure, make him a great man. But in order for us to confidently answer whether his regime was a successful one, then we must descend deeper at a glance, remember, and perhaps we could even compare him to other notable figures in history. And towards the end of this, when you rest your eyes from all the glancing, you will find his place in history. And to do this, we're going to look at three notable areas of his entire regime. The first one is what I refer to as the revolutionary high. The second one is the lowest of lows. Life must always be balanced, remember? And the third one is more of a question, whether from the lows he did have his own redemption. So, to the revolutionary high. Human history accounts for thousands of revolutions. The most notable ones to modern democracies are the French Revolution and the American Revolution. To these two, we have one particular individual known as Marquis de Lafayette. So would Kibaki suffice as our Marquis de Lafayette? I think not, and I say this with great reserve. Had the 2002 revolution culminated to transforming our republic from a governance standpoint, a political standpoint, and not just an economic standpoint, then he would have been our Marquis. And the reason for this is that we often heard of how tribalism perpetuated across the governance structures, and even more daunting was the long shadow cast by what was fondly referred to by the media as the kitchen cabinet, or as we refer to it in terms of conspiracy as the Mount Kenya Mafia. I think that taints it, that robs him of that honor of being the Marquis. This does not take away from such progressive footnotes that he has, for example, free primary education for children, and also the economic highs and boom that we experienced as a country. Now let's go to the lows. Remember, it's still a glance. 2007. It's a blot upon a white parchment, a stain of blood that cannot be forgotten. And I think this in itself is very condemning. However, we also note that even in these lows, he was a man who vouched for peace. So at least to that regard, even as we borrow from the French Revolution, we won't term him as our Napoleon Bonaparte. He wasn't a tyrant to that end. Now let's get to the redemption. Remember as well, this is still a glance. The 2010 Constitution, the most transformative charter this country has ever seen. It was passed in his reign. To those ends, I would liken him to perhaps George Washington, a man who championed the greatest constitution any democracy would rely on when forming their own. And perhaps by a stretch we could say that he is in many ways our George Washington. For those of you who are able to see his televised funeral, his son always mentioned that that constitution was something he was very proud of. It denotes that it wasn't just some form of duty to be undertaken. For him, it was something he wanted to bequeath the nation that he loved with. But we must also realize that George Washington was a military leader. So Kibaki, for his love of peace, didn't stain his hands too much with blood. So I don't think he would be a George Washington. What I think, if I am true to myself, is that the late Mwai Kibaki is our Flavius Stiligo. the great Roman general who, through his wit and military prowess, kept at bay the barbarian forces from invading the Western Roman Empire. And when Flavius Stilicho died, for the first time in 8 centuries, Rome was invaded. So Kibaki was the bastion that held at bay the looters we have seen over the last 10 years. That is something worth remembering him for. And so, in finality, we pivot back to that question that I had asked. What is it that makes a leader great? Would it be the victories that he has conquered? Kibaki had many of those. Would it be the grace or ferocity with which he overcame his adversity? He did have those. Or perhaps it's only you, at the comfort of your home, at the reclusion of your own mind, who can answer that question. Thank you.